Well, we only got a few more months to do these before they all get crammed into obsolescence, so I guess we better start knocking these out quick. Let's just start with these items here. I'm gonna be honest, I have no idea where to put any of these. I know it's at the bottom, but I consider this more of a quest item than a consumable, even though that's technically what it is. If using a needle to placate the wrath of your now ex-wife is worth an honest ranking, then I guess people can argue amongst this by themselves. But I'm not here to tell you how to use pots or mushroom grenades or whatever FromSoft thinks is the correct way to make a Molotov. I'm here to let you know you are boring as shit. I know, this wasn't my decision, but it is something I can help you with. Okay, let's start with that browser of yours. It's really just holding you back. Here, let me get you started with Opera GX. Opera GX is probably the single resource friendliest browser I've ever used. If you're used to keeping 26 tabs open at once, all while capturing footage and listening to music at the same time, you need a browser that won't take up any more memory than it needs to. You have access to a resource panel that lets you put a limiter on the amount of CPU or RAM you're willing to let go of, but I think my favorite feature of this browser is just the sheer amount of customizability it gives you. This browser has an entire community behind it, making their own mods and themes. My first trip to the GX store was honestly overwhelming, and yes, I know it's called a store, but you don't actually like buy anything. That's just what they call it. Take the zombie apocalypse mod for instance. It changes literally everything about the aesthetic of your browser, from the keyboard sounds to sounds that play when opening and closing tabs, to the themes, colors, and even a dedicated wallpaper for whenever you start up. But that's just one single example. I mean, you've got themes like Elden Ring, you've got Witcher, you've got Nier Automata, this Persona 5 theme that I used for like 2 weeks, Hades. Like, I swear to God, any niche you can think of, someone out there's probably made a theme for it. It also comes with immediate access to a host of AI-powered tools like ChatGPT and ChatSonic on the sidebar to generate creative ideas, itineraries, or if you just want to make research for a paper easier and more seamless, as long as you don't like plagiarize or something. Like, don't do that. Opera GX even comes equipped with an import tool that allows you to import all your settings from your previous browser. Bookmarks, search history, pretty much any extension you had on Google Chrome will be 100% compatible. Like, I seriously can't underline how enjoyable and fun this browser is to just use. Like, I know this is a promo and everything, but I've actually been using this browser for like a year and a half now, and it's just a really fun time. You can download Opera GX using my link in the description and pinned comment right now, and thanks to Opera for sponsoring this video. Treating them as another consumable oversimplifies their impact on gameplay and what they're actually supposed to do. So for the sake of simplicity, I'm only defining a consumable here as something that can be 1, used up in quantity, and 2, you need to either find or craft more in order to replenish your supply. I know the game says the steed whistle is a consumable. If the game told you to take the day off and order some Chinese food, you wouldn't go and do it. You'd probably be like, how the fuck does this game know where I live and that I'm within reasonably close enough proximity to a Chinese restaurant to consider it a dinner option? So if you clicked on this video and got confused by the random, like, arbitrary number, then there you go. That's why. And yes, I am using an infinite consumable cheat. I'm not farming materials for 115 fucking paragraphs worth of footage. Alright, here we go. 115, the glass shard. Nope, just get it out of my face. They don't become golden seeds or something when planted near a river. They don't damage enemies if they walk over them. They can't even be thrown as an item like ruin fragments. I even remember seeing an interesting suggestion on a forum saying that consuming these should contribute to bleed buildup, which wouldn't be an awful idea, I guess. How do you even use these? I can't even find them in my inventory. I can't throw them at people. I can't even toss them on the ground like rainbow stones or grace mimics. It's one thing to say something is useless as a means of making a joke via hyperbole, but even ruin fragments can be thrown at people. Even grace mimics can light up dark areas if you want to take a screenshot of your character's clothes or something. The glass shard can't do anything. You can't even sell them to merchants. But then why the fuck would they want them anyway? It's more than just useless. It revels in its uselessness. It is a true trailblazer with a type of uselessness that breaks the scale, and I'm genuinely impressed. Number 114, the Grace Mimic. Maybe in an alternate universe where the game perpetually remains 2 weeks old for the rest of time, this would have been able to do something other than light up dark caves for a few seconds. But people learn quickly. Going by the item description, it's supposed to show you the way into the next legacy area, but without any sense of order, which in layman's terms terms essentially translates to pointing wherever the goddamn hell it wants. I don't know the threshold of what this item considers important. It could be pointing to a legacy exit. It could be pointing to Gideon's mailbox, opening up a side quest where we expose him for tax fraud. Like, who knows? Follow it and find out. Oh, no. Maybe it's a PvP item, right? You know, like trick invaders into thinking you're resting and have your friend waiting on them to give them an all-expense-paid trip to the Limgrave Boneyard. Only being invaded by NPCs in the game teaches you that you can't rest at graces, nor can you warp to them during invasions. Like, literally, no matter what excuse I try to make for this item, there's a counter-argument waiting around every single corner, permanently relegating this item to flashlight tier. Number 113, the Furlcalling Finger Remedy. Yep, it's this thing. The item in which everyone took one glance at the description and then ignored it for the rest of time. Has anyone actually found a co-op sign by using one of these things? All I can find are people in forums calmly reasoning with FromSoft on the topic that their peer-to-peer system might be a little on the outdated side. This wouldn't be such a big deal if using this didn't also disable spirit summons. I don't feel like it'd be a huge ask to simply read whether or not the player has a second entity enter a gate with them, and if they don't, just reactivate spirit summoning. I don't know, is this a nitpick? I can't really tell. I've never actually summoned another player before, and something tells me I'm in good company when I say that. And you know what that means? Fuck you, the Bloody Finger's up next. I don't know where either of these go. Like, these just aren't mine to rank. Number 111 and 110 and 109, the Raisins. It was extremely funny watching the general community attitude towards horseback combat fluctuate so rapidly in the game's first couple months of release. We went from, I have a horse, to using the horse makes the game easier, to there are probably certain places you shouldn't use the horse, to fuck it, horse combat is bad, just don't do it, don't ever do it, don't use the horse, before finally circling back around to, wait, I have a horse? Raisins are permanently consigned to the lowest tier simply because healing with your flask while on Torrent also heals Torrent, and Torrent taking his own separate damage from an attack happens so infrequently that it almost never matters. Number 108, the Scriptstone. I tried really hard to find a practical use for this item. I've even seen a case being argued where people will leave messages on the perimeters of invisible bridges so that using a Scriptstone will more clearly outline where exactly you can walk without risk of falling off. And that's just so awesome to me because we found an item so inherently useless that we as a community came together and actually made it worth something practical. I'm all for playing the Good Samaritan and upvoting every single message, hoping to God I'll heal someone at the exact right moment, but I'm never really sure if I'm actually helping anyone by doing so. And how many times do you have to read the words tongue butthole before it finally starts to sink in that most of us just aren't that fucking funny? Number 107, the Ruin Fragment. The Ruin Fragment is an awful consumable. The Ruin Fragment is an awful crafting item. The Ruin Fragment remains in permanently limited supply until you can get past the Godskin duo towards the end of the game, at which point they're officially, finally added to the Twin Maiden shop, and I'm comfortable enough with declaring that a dumb decision no matter what the reason is behind it. Pebbles and Bloodborne were commonly used as luring items to select a single enemy out of a crowd and force an aggro. They were used this way because they were both cheap to buy and extremely common. Now, with Elden Ring's crafting system, you can stuff several bone darts down your pockets using nothing but the femur of a goat that accidentally got in the way of your wave of gold. The accessibility of better aggro tools takes away everything that would have been captivating about the Ruin Fragment to the point where its strength scaling was completely busted for almost a year and only like 5 people ever noticed. Only, wait, it's still busted. It's been over 2 years and it's still busted. Why even have strength scaling then? What's the point of any of this? Number 106, Soft Cotton. Certain playstyles are really difficult to make work when most of the game takes place in a vastly open field. And it's not Soft Cotton's fault that stealth just so happens to be one of those playstyles. Muffling footsteps isn't one of those random pointless buffs that contribute to nothing. If you're trying to get through a dungeon as quickly as possible, you can full tilt sprint past shit without a single head turning. Muffled footsteps are for when crouch walking just isn't fast enough. Just one small problem. This benefit is honestly not that uncommon. Muffled footsteps are also a benefit of the Creepus Vial Talisman, the Assassin's Gambit Ash, and the Assassin's Approach Incantation, one of the cheapest and most basic incantations in the game, and it's given to you as a passive when wearing the full Black Knife set. It's not that being quiet doesn't come with its tactical advantages, but when you take such a basic player buff that can be found on like 7 different items and then attach it to a consumable, you aren't going to have a very confident answer when people ask why you exist. Number 105, the Rainbow Stone. Wait, the pitch of the sound can be used to gauge the fall? Being perfectly honest, given Elden Ring's track record for flavor text and descriptions like this, I just chose not to believe this immediately after I read it. But I got curious and decided to test it anyways. Okay, so apparently it does work. Wow, I'm impressed. I didn't think it would do anything. But this raises another question, a question that I believe is significantly more important. If a gap of vertical distance looks lethal enough, who is actually going to take the time and test this given how merciless fall damage is in this game anyways? You're probably either going to decide against taking the risk, or you're just going to chance it because it would be funnier anyways. Who is this item for? Number 104, the Alluring Pot. Everything this item chooses to do and be angers me tremendously. Incredibly uncommon crafting materials, and a ritual pot I could have used for various elemental frag grenades, can only lure certain types of humanoid enemies like demi-humans and albinaurics that you haven't already aggroed, and the duration of the effect itself is adjacent to farting with the windows down. I could fire an arrow. No, I could throw a rock at a wall and turn someone's head for longer than this effect, so you're sniffing fucking crayons if you think I'm spending 11 FP on this shit. Number 103, the Albinauric Pot. I've come to accept a very emboldening truth about myself recently. I am not interested in anything to do with this game's PvP, like, at all. I have nothing to prove. The complete absence of covenants in this game took away most of the practical benefits PvP had in earlier Souls iterations, and if there was anything playing competitive Overwatch in 2018 taught me, it's that I respect my time way too much to wait in a fucking queue for 15 minutes. So my opinion on the Albinauric Pot probably won't mean a lot to anyone who disagrees, but the reason it should is because they still had plenty of opportunities for this to work in the standard single player. Depraved perfumers and Halictree Knights still have no problem gulping down a nice healthy dose of Robitussin, effectively wasting a ritual pot until you can fill it with something else. And even in PvP, it still doesn't prevent the use of raw meat dumpling, so if you get unlucky and run into a Kindred Exaltation build, then you're just fucked. At least you can use them on Gideon, I guess. Number 102, Stimulating Boluses. Okay, well, we got the easy shit out of the way, so this is officially where we might start running into some disagreements. Go kick the shit out of Miriam and her weird upside-down tower, get the sorcery, and forget about ever using these for any situation. One of these ailments are almost exclusively PvP, save for a couple trolls and an Eye of Sauron hanging out near the Dectus Lift, and the other ailment I can only get away with saying isn't a problem for about 3 more months, so I'm putting that logic to work while I can by giving the Stimulating Boluses a yawn and a middle finger. Number 101, the Poisoned Stone. 100 poison buildup is quite a substantial amount for a little pebble, but the speed at which this is thrown out massively bottlenecks the amount of poison you're applying per second. Poison bone darts only inflict 58 poison per use, yet get thrown out at over twice the speed, allowing for significantly quicker buildup, and that's if you aren't carrying a poison pot or a poison stoned clump, which inflicts a total of 225 buildup if all 5 stones connect. And this isn't even the better poison variant we're talking about here, so you might as well just sell these whenever you get them. Number 100, the Glowstone. You know that one character in superhero movies that don't really have any outstanding talents or cardinal moments that define who they are, but they can do this one completely irrelevant thing so freakishly well that it actually makes everyone else uncomfortable? That's the Glowstone. There will almost never be an instance where the lantern doesn't give you the exact amount of light that you need. But if you're fighting a boss in a dungeon or a cave somewhere and you think burning its eyebrows off with a stadium light might be a good strategy, then, well, here you go. That's why the Glowstones are here. Number 99, Clarifying Meat. This meat has exactly one purpose in this game, and that's to give Frenzyflame builds an extra half gallon of gas in their unendurable Frenzy tank. And even then you only get 1 or 2 full uses out of it, considering how long it takes for the buildup to actually disappear on its own, which is just stupid. I'm sorry, this should have been patched out like months ago. Using any food item that increases a resistance to something comes with the massive drawback of waiting for this dumb fucking bar to deplete, or wasting a bolus item if you're impatient. If there's any other use for this item, I would seriously like for someone to tell me, because I just don't think there is one. Number 98, the Explosive Stone. I was curious how other players were using these, so I decided to poke around on Reddit and some wiki pages, and the only bit of applicable advice I could find was using the fire damage to reset Frostbite. So I think that tells you everything you need to know. It's the proud owner of 108 base fire damage, which is less than half of a regular ass fire pot. The only benefit being you're able to carry 20 at once, allowing me to come to the conclusion that you would only ever use these for the utility that comes with fire damage, such as igniting finger creepers or resetting Frostbite, I guess. Number 97, the Beastlure Pot. Luring in beast-type enemies have been somewhat of a staple in these games. The effect of this pot casts a much wider net than the Alluring Pot, but it'll only ever be good if everything about it is given a massive improvement. Its range, its duration, the fact that you can't throw it down to take aggro off of yourself, that's really not asking for a lot. I'm using a ritual pot to craft one of these. Having these in your inventory meant foregoing 1 extra Giant's Flame or Rot pot or something. That's a pretty significant sacrifice I'm making. So the least this thing can do is elicit a more exciting reaction than a dog turning its head for 3 seconds before going back to the rock it was pissing on. Number 96, Immunizing Meat. Immunizing Meat boosts your resistance to poison and rot, and unlike other status ailments, poison and rot are highly environmental. Instead of being attacked with an ailment, you'll usually be crossing lakes or something that cause a gradual buildup, tying your immunity to a specific amount of time you have to cross said lake. That's a really great reason to not spend half that time running in circles waiting for the buildup to dissipate, effectively giving you around 35 full seconds of boosted resistance without any consequence. So whatever fog gate you're popping this behind, I guess you better kill that shit fast. Number 95, the Explosive Stone Clump. 54 base fire damage, but you throw 5 instead of 1. With an 80 in all stats, I can barely scrape my ass past the 400 damage mark in a single use, and that's if all the stones connect. So I'm not exactly sure how I'm supposed to react to the A strength scaling here, but I don't need any math to conclude that it's really not a huge help. No idea why these deserve to be such a rare drop either. Like, they aren't sold by merchants, you can't craft them using 5 regular stones. What is so special about this item that justifies its astronomical low drop rate? Like, I'm not poaching rhinos or some shit, these are just exploding rocks. Stop making it look like I'm supposed to care about this. Number 94, the Poison Pot. 200 poison buildup is enough to proc poison on a single hit against enemies you would literally kill faster by walking up to them and punching them. Poison Bone Darts and Poison Grease are both great sources of consistent and sustained buildup that not only work well in standard encounters, but also against various bosses. The Poison Pot applies buildup in a burst, which can be good every now and then, but cracked pots come in a very limited supply, and if I'm not consistently proccing poison in a single throw, then it's just going to make me wonder whether or not I'm better off using that pot for something else. And throwing in the roped variant right after it too for the exact same reason. Pots are already in limited quantity, and one thing that will almost certainly make me re-strategize how I'm using my consumables is pairing that already limited quantity with an additional rare item drop from enemies I don't give a shit about. Number 92, Acid Spray Mist. Perfumer consumables fall short in a lot of inconvenient ways, such as having a dedicated talisman that boosts damage from perfumer-themed items, when most of those items are either buffs or debuffs. The Acid Spray Mist reduces the physical damage of enemies by 15%. 60 seconds is just barely enough to kill weaker bosses, and the only enemies that solely deal physical damage are usually the ones you find in standard encounters, like mannequins or demi-humans. And even that's not completely true, since demi-humans can throw fire pots at you. I'm not really sure what this item needs, but the way it is right now, it just feels like I'm always missing out on something more preferable. Number 91, Invigorating Meat. This meat suffers from the same drawback the other cured meats do. Takes half the duration of the effect just for the extra buildup to be fully removed, and if you've tried one of them, I don't know, you've tried them all. This isn't going to be another weapons video. I'm not writing a dissertation for every single one of these. Number 90, Drawstring Blood Grease. There's a fraction of players who prefer drawstrings over the regular grease because of their usually enhanced buildup numbers, but some greases just don't cut it. Drawstring Blood Grease sports an incredibly meager 38 buildup per hit, relegating its use to bleed daggers, which means the Great Knife. The Great Knife has both innate status and is fast enough to land consistent hits. If you're using this grease on anything that isn't the Great Knife, you will run out of stamina before a single proc, and that's if the 15-second effect doesn't expire. It is a genuine chore to try and wrench a status proc out of weapons that don't already have innate bleed with this. Number 89, Rejuvenating Boluses. Deathblight is never an issue solely due to the severity of getting afflicted. It's only an issue because it is a status that has to remind you it exists. I can think of 2 enemies off the top of my head that inflict Deathblight, and that's frogs and worm faces. I don't think a single person has ever been given this status by a Mausoleum Knight, and I had to look up how many enemies give it to you just to be reminded of the 2 crabs that also inflict Deathblight. These boluses are a fine help when you actually need them, but if you know how to quickly get rid of these enemies that build it up, then you'll just never use them. Number 88 and 87, the 2 Baldachin's Blessings. Don't get me wrong, it's still bad, but I think the health debuff leads a lot of people into easily misunderstanding it. Attaching a debuff to the non-use of an item while it's in your inventory is right up there with two-handed shaving razors as one of humanity's shittiest ideas. But the buff you're given upon using it is basically free hyper armor for whatever you feel like using it for. As long as you're okay with sabotaging your ritual talisman build, the effect itself is pretty decent. Just not a fan of the whole, everything else. Number 86, Blood Grease. This is the only time I've both checked this info in a wiki and tested it myself, because the info I saw being thrown out was so inconceivably bad that I just thought someone was lying. Turns out the buildup on this item is really that unbelievably weak. 30 bleed buildup for 90 seconds is adjacent to offering a homeless man a quarter pounder. Like, sure, it's better than nothing, but it offers so little substance that you might as well just not even have it most of the time. Most standard enemies and bosses usually have a bleed resistance of 150 54. You can exhaust a full combo with most weapons and not even reach that number with 30 per hit. Number 85, Raw Meat Dumpling. I know this is a Kindred Exaltation item, but why? Is it really that hard to just throw a pot at something? The Fetid Pots inflict buildup on your character regardless, so even if you miss or if the enemies are poison resistant, you can still activate the effect. I'm only saying this because I feel like the only case anyone ever makes for this item is for when they're running a Kindred build, and if someone stuffs an Albinauric Pot down your throat, then you still have plenty of time for regen spells and other means of healing that isn't a flask. If you're just wanting to heal, this is a last resort in most situations. Number 84, the Spellproof Dried Liver. Magic damage is one of the more negatable types of damage in the game's universe, and not having a Spellproof Liver on my hand at all times doesn't immediately put me in a dangerously close distance from death or anything. If you can feel a crystal being shoved up your ass sometime soon, you've got an extensive library of magic absorbing tools, armor sets, and pretty much any wooden shield. Running into magic damage is common, but it's not nearly as ever present as other damage types like physical and fire. Number 83, Clarifying Boluses. Boluses as a remedy to a status with immediate consequences are in an interesting spot. Neutralizing and Preserving Boluses offer a cure to an overtime effect that gives you plenty of time to mitigate what would otherwise be problematic damage. Sleep, Madness, and Bleed status effects do not do this. Their buildup leads to an instant cocktail splashing of bad shit to the point where if the status gauge is building up quickly, you will actually have to disengage from whatever you're doing and do something about it. The activating Boluses keeps you still for a short amount of time, which can just result in more buildup being accumulated after you've eaten them. They still work, and they're good items most of the time. It's just that their use sometimes depends on what type of status you're actually trying to cure. Number 82, the Dappled Cured Meat. You wanna know what's stupid? Tying 6 completely different status ailments to a single item when you're only ever in danger of having to deal with 2 at a time at any given moment will never make sense. Unless you're fighting a Sanguine Noble with a Frenzyflame build that just so happens to use Fetid Pots, you will literally never take full advantage of this item. However, one small compliment I can pay towards this item is that usually when something applies to all of your resistance, the amount it gets boosted by is significantly less. And the Dappled Meat actually boosts everything by the same amount given by the other 3, which is 100. So I can't really say spreading yourself thin here leaves you in an awkward spot, because 100 resistance to everything is objectively better than 2 ailments. Number 81 and number 80, the Drawstring Poison and Rot Greases. I have yet to hear a solid reason for why an item as rudimentary and as bland as fucking string is this much of a chore to farm. This one item single-handedly pushes these 2 greases off the table in lieu of more preferable options. Throwing a pot isn't that hard, and it's doubly effective considering the materials required to repeatedly make them are things you probably pick up on accident anyways. 80 buildup per strike is amazing, but I have shit to do. Most of you have real jobs, unlike myself. You can't be scheduling an hour of your free time farming for string. Like, the item isn't even that good. Not when you have other means of inflicting more powerful poison in the game anyways. Number 79, the Silver Pickled Foulfoot. Discovery is just a weird stat. It's honestly just a weird thing to put in a Souls game. It's the only stat in the entire game that operates off of a base chance of something happening. Do you think nearly as many people would use oil pots if it tripled the next instance of fire damage 30% of the time? Or if elemental greases inflicted 200 flat damage per attack, but also had a chance to only deal 20? Like, no, that item would suck. That item would piss you off and make you feel like you wasted your goddamn time. Boosting Discovery by 50 is barely enough to gaslight the player into thinking the item is worth something. The items you pick up are roughly the same, but every now and then you'll just stumble upon an extra helmet or 2. Like, that's the realistic review of this item. Number 78, the Holy Water Pot. Making this video motivated me to give the attack ideas of all the pots an honest look, and some of the base damage values just made me mad. Magic pots get 320 damage as a base, I'm guessing because high magic absorption isn't uncommon for most enemies. Lightning is less commonly defended against, I guess, but the lightning pots are given a nice healthy 260, and I really don't understand this because the local flavor of like 5 different legacy areas all treat holy damage like it's a sinus infection, and all the holy pots get is 167. Why do so many balancing decisions in this game seem to deliberately bottleneck this element so hatefully for some reason? Number 77, the Roped Holy Water Pot. Okay, seriously, I'm getting fucking frustrated. 150 holy damage. What could I possibly do with 150 anything in this game except kick the shit out of wolves or something? None of the other roped pots suffer from this. The roped magic pot still inflicts 322 damage. The roped fire and lightning pots also have the same damage. This only happens to the holy pots, and it was the one pot that deserved it the least. Is there something we're missing here? What is with FromSoft relegating this element to a support utility every time they put it in a game? Oh, but no, it nukes deathbirds, so that makes it okay. Like, your mom nukes deathbirds, bitch. Number 76, Stanching Boluses. This item suffers from the same conundrum as the clarifying ones. If using the item locks you in a specific helpless position for a couple seconds, you're risking more status accumulation depending on how aggressive the enemies you're fighting decide to be. You are granted a slight bit of extra resistance once bleed procs to prevent the effect from being applied over and over again, but since the consequences are so immediate, you'll only ever use these to prevent a proc, not give yourself extra resistance to a proc you think might be happening soon. I don't know, these just feel weird and pointless to use most of the time. Number 75, Poison Grease. Both Poison and Freezing Grease have spent months battling the grave misfortune of having to contend with an incantation counterpart that just gets the job done better. Poison Grease, however, is outclassed for a slightly different reason. The ingredients aren't nearly as finite as they are for freezing items, but there exists multiple types of poison, one of which is barely deadlier than seasonal allergies, and the second being analogous to nuclear radiation. The first variant, the Poison Grease variant, not only inflicts significantly less damage over time, but isn't even the best option for consistent poison buildup, a true last resort item. Number 74, the Bone Dart. The physical base damage difference between Bone Darts and Poison Bone Darts was a much smaller gap than I was expecting. I was heading into this one fully prepared to recommend these over the Poison Bones because I was thinking the damage discrepancy between the two was a little larger. There exists 7 points of damage between these two items. Everything the Bone Dart can do, the Poison Bone Dart can do with additional status, meaning there's very little actual use for these outside of, well, hunting animals to make more Bone Darts, I guess. Number 73, the Gold Pickled Foulfoot. Thanks to Elden Ring's expansive talisman system, various assorted unique skills, hidden armor benefits, great runes, and many other facets of the game, artificially inflating your level has become easier than ever before. Being a slightly higher level than you were 15 minutes ago won't suddenly make enemies in the Halig tree deal less bullshit damage, not unless you've leveled up like 20 times in a row. These items are a single-use rune booster for when you're about to kill a huge boss, or if you're doing a run that involves killing Greol in the first 15 minutes. Otherwise, playing through the game normally usually just gets you more than enough runes for anything. Number 72, the Ironjar Aromatic. This is an item that tests your ability to fat roll through attacks. I legitimately don't know if this is a good item or not because every single forum and wiki I've browsed on is just filled with people belting out Metal Gear Rising quotes to each other. This is a crowd control item, and a very interesting one. Boosting damage negation by 40% is pretty insane, but it's nowhere near enough for you to stand there face-fucking a group of enemies for more than a few seconds, especially if you're in New Game Plus. If you take more than a few hits at a time, you're still gonna have to move your ass. And unless used against certain enemies like Bloodhound Knights or Cleanrot Knights, I've noticed this item is just a shortcut to getting you killed most other times. Besides, locking this item behind 3 living jar shards per use is just begging to be overlooked. Number 71, Freezing Grease. It's not necessarily useless, just constantly overshadowed by something better. A lot of the greases end up suffering from this problem. Frozen Armament will take you exactly 7 points of frostbite further, in addition to having a fairly accessible intelligence requirement. Rhymed crystal buds are not infinite, and they can only be farmed from nobles in the snowfields or crayfish in the mountaintops, neither of which have a 100% drop rate. So given the non-renewable nature of this crafting item, I'd much rather be plugging those into freezing pots. Number 70, Lightning Proof Dried Liver. Of the 4 elemental types, lightning is consistently the least present. Such a lack of presence exists outside of a specific part of the endgame that they even resorted to giving lightning attacks to random enemies you wouldn't expect, like Watchdogs and Silver Tears, as though someone on the creative team actually spoke up 2 weeks before the game released and said, oh fuck, guys, we only put like 2 lightning areas in the whole game. And then some douche captain made a plant that shoots it at you. Number 69, the Roped Fetid Pot. The single benefit this has over the Roped Poison Pot is just more poison. Stronger poison, mind you, but if you're running an Exaltation build and are able to choose who gets inflicted, I personally feel like that choice is a pretty obvious one. 250 base buildup, and with high arcane, the amount of poison inflicted can easily climb into the mid-3s, so somebody's getting poisoned if you throw this out. I just don't get why all the people gift this to others in PvP as a slight. Like, it's not that bad of an item, just use it on something. All you did here was tell the other person you farmed a string for an hour. Like you just made yourself look stupid. Number 68, Dragonwound Grease. This item is just fucking cool, and I'm incredibly bitter at the fact that I have to rank it this low. Dragons are a situational encounter on the best of days, and there's only one main area in the game where they're a consistent enough problem to warrant farming the items for this. And that same exact area just so happens to be where you farm your ingredients, making the acquiring of said grease quite the annoying venture. The farming of gravel stones makes this one of the hardest items to reliably craft once you've exhausted the limited supply the game gives you via pickups. And I'm sorry, but I'm not jogging through the Dragon Temple's entire welcoming committee just to kill one dragon I had to respec for anyway. Number 67, 66, 65, and 64, all of the drawstring elemental greases. Holy, magic, fire, and lightning in that exact order. I can't be fucked to come up with some meaningless math equation in my head as a result of going through all the params and seeing just exactly how much better one element type is versus the other, when all of these items suffer from the same glaring drawback. Either give us a bell bearing that has string in the DLC, or these items will be permanently stuck in the forgettable middle realm between awkward and useless. Number 63, the Fetid Pot. Remember when I said there were two different types of poison in the game? Well, I may have left one out. The first type of poison, basic poison, deals 0.07% of a target's maximum HP with an extra 7 flat damage on the side every second for 90 seconds. Deadly poison, or lethal poison, or super poison, or brown death, or now I'm just making shit up, applies 12 flat damage plus 0.14% of maximum HP for only 30 seconds. However, a third variant is tied specifically to the roped Fetid Pot, which bumps up the deadly poison's flat damage by 2. So that's 14 flat damage and then whatever percentage I said earlier. The only logic I can think of to justify this weird damage discrepancy here is just that the rope pots are harder to land in most situations. Number 62, the Sacred Order Pot. You know what? At least we're finally doing some goddamn damage. 312 base holy damage, which is just barely enough to finally bring it up to par with most other elemental ritual pot items. The damage is pretty even, and I turned down all the damage negations to 0 just for accuracy's sake, but even then you'll notice the holy element just barely comes up short by around 20 to 30 damage, give or take. Also deals 90% extra damage to undead as opposed to the 300% bonus given by regular holy water pots. Double Sacred Order damage and quadruple holy water pot damage is basically the same amount. So if you're crafting these specifically for deathbirds or skeletons or whatever, then you might as well just use the regular holy pots since they're a smaller investment. Number 61, Neutralizing Boluses. Rendered irrelevant when there's a perfectly fine support incantation that only needs 12 faith and minimizes the impact of poison and rot down to a couple of fucking funny-ass jokes I can end this sentence with, whatever. If you're gonna make me hunt dragonflies, you don't get a joke. Oh, and the merchant by the coastal cave sells 5 of them, which is probably more than you'll ever need. Number 60, Exalted Flesh. 20% more physical damage is stupidly good. Real shame a 30-second buff is attached to a craftable item with limited in-game resources. It's an even bigger shame the iconography looks so goddamn tasty as fuck. Makes me want to go outside and start grilling a barbecue chicken or some shit. But from a culinary standpoint, this makes no sense. Like, wouldn't the bone you got from hunting an animal have meat on it already? Why do I need a raw meat dumpling? Why is anything outside of a bone and an open fire needed to make this item? Number 59, the Rune Arc. This is the only consumable in the entire game with a level of value that drastically fluctuates depending on which great rune you have equipped, making this the only item in the video that can potentially occupy 7 completely different spaces on the same list. So whatever, I'm slapping this one right in the middle. And I know this technically breaks the rule for what I said I was gonna rank, but there were so many around the world that it felt awkward not putting them in here somewhere. And I guess you can farm them by doing PvP shenanigans, so whatever. Number 58, 57, and 56, the 3 white meats. The white cured meats don't suffer from the same drawbacks as the regular meats for a couple reasons. Firstly, the effect only gives you 75 resistance instead of 100, meaning it takes significantly less time for the status bars to deplete. Secondly, the duration is doubled, leaving you with around 100 total seconds where the effect is fully and only beneficial for you. And that's still clickbait because the effect is supposed to be like 2 full minutes, but it's more like a "this new update is insane" kind of clickbait, and not a hydraulic pressing my son in real life kind of clickbait. And I guess throw the dappled white meat in here too, because I kind of forgot to rank it. It's like nowhere in the script and I could have sworn I put it down, but I guess I didn't. So this is where it's going, I guess. Number 55, the Roped Oil Pot. Can someone explain to me why there's a roped version of this? String apparently doesn't come cheap in this game, and it feels awkward using what's otherwise one of the best and most easily crafted consumables in the game as a means of flinching a rear-bound enemy. I mean, they're faster, I guess, sure, but if you aren't used to the timing of rim jobbing your left stick where the pot flings out, you could very easily waste this item when a regular oil pot probably would have landed fine. I don't know. I'm just glad we didn't get oil grease as a potential consumable. Shit would have been as useful as a wooden diaper. Number 54, the Cuckoo Glintstone. I mean, it's fine. The consistent damage is nice, and they make great backups if you're out of magic pots, but I feel like the only advantage these have against the 2 Glintstone Scraps is the fact that they're easily craftable. The damage is adjacent to the regular Glintstone Scrap, maybe a little higher with good intelligence, but all 3 bullets firing at once means they can be easily dodged by NPCs and enemies that can clear enough distance when evading. If you think of these as nothing more than an auxiliary supply of magic pots, then you won't be disappointed. Number 53, the Academy Magic Pot. 405 base damage on a single consumable is hard to ignore in most cases, and one of the ways to make it easier to ignore is if that damage is magic damage. But if you really want people to completely overlook it altogether, you can tie its craftability to a non-renewable item that only has a 100% drop rate on enemies that literally do not respawn ever. This creates a very discomforting feeling in players whenever they use one of these. The Doomsday Prepper mentality begins to kick in, and it eats away at the player, forcing them to constantly question whether or not they could have gotten a little more use out of that throw. And when this pot barely drags its blue ass over the 700 damage mark, I'm asking that question very often. Number 52, 51, and 50, the Roped Fire, Magic, and Lightning Pot. If this script makes me write one more sentence about how hard it is to obtain pieces of string in this game, I'm gonna start ripping the tags off mattresses. Number 49, the Thawfrost Boluses. Frostbite is a very unique status in that it gives you both immediate damage equal to 10% of your HP plus 30 more, and it reduces damage absorption by 20% for a short amount of time. This is the only status ailment that has both immediate consequences and a debuff over time, making the Thawfrost Boluses decently useful whether or not you're completely afflicted. But if you're a ranged build or you just don't have them equipped for whatever reason, it honestly might be a safer choice to just play passively and wait out the duration of the debuff instead. Number 48, the Cursed Blood Pot. Alright, I'm gonna teach you guys how to farm rune bears. Go pick up the Sword of St. Drina so you don't waste materials doing this. You don't even need to upgrade it. These lumbering tubs of fur and anger issues only need 84 build-up for nap time. Go to the Deep Shear for Well Grace, and there's a rune bear right behind you that does respawn. Golden Vow, Rallying Standard, I used Blood Boil here, but you can use Fire Shrouding Tear, just whatever attack buffs you feel like throwing on. Poison Mist doesn't wake him, so douse him with a bit of Fart Gas to activate Kindred Talisman. Oil Pot, then a fire attack of your choice. If he doesn't immediately die, then you fucked something up. There you go, an unlimited supply of Beast Blood. As for the item itself, if you don't use summons, then, well, you'll never use this item. But if you're attached to a specific Spirit Ash you want to make work, even though people say to switch to someone else, then, well, maybe all they need is a little help. Number 47, the Glintstone Scrap. Easily farmed from Glintstone miners in various caves. One full run through the Rhea Lucaria tunnels with a decently high discovery should get you around 4 to 5. It's not the hardest consumable to stockpile, but the game definitely misses an opportunity to make large scraps craftable here. If you can make what's functionally a grenade with butterfly wings, a mushroom, and a cat tooth, then you should be able to make large Glintstone scraps by just combining 2 or 3 of these. You also get large variants by farming the same enemy, and I don't think there's ever a reason to use regular scraps over the large scraps unless you're just down to your last pixel of FP. Number 46, the Poisoned Stone Clump. I mean, it's a poison item, and it also inflicts generic tier 1 baby bitch poison, so there aren't a whole lot of reasons to get too excited about these. However, 5 projectiles in one item at 45 buildup each totals out to 225, and even then I'd still rather just use the Poison Spray Mist and hope whatever I'm spitting it at is cognitively panned enough to stand still and eat it. You can always switch to an item that builds up a deadlier poison since they all share the same status bar, but that's only if 225 poison somehow ends up not being enough. Number 45, the Fireproof Liver. You hate the sun like the rest of us degens? I bet you do. Well, here you go. Now you can deal with 15% less of it. Number 44, Holy Grease. As is the case for pretty much all grease items, the damage bonus value is a flat number, so it'll always see better use on faster weapons like thrusting swords, daggers, and curved swords. 85 flat damage becomes increasingly non-essential as you dig into the late game, and this particular holy damage gives no bonus to skeletons, deathbirds, or those who live in death. It's still 85 more damage per strike, so it would be disingenuous to say it doesn't make a difference, but compared to others, the advantages are diminutive and short-lasting. Number 43, the Uplifting Aromatic. The attack buff is classified as an aura buff, and there are honestly just way too many good aura buffs you have access to that this aromatic will inevitably end up overriding. The damage cancel feature is very useful on its own, but 10% more damage is not worth trying to make it work. The Arteria Leaf is also a necessary item required for the Uplifting Aromatic, and any consumable that demands a limited quantity of crafting items without ever letting you know in advance needs to come with its own warning labels. Number 42, Soap. Soap is more than just for fashion purposes. It can get rid of excess dirt, grime, poison, rot, and I have a great difficulty writing this paragraph in a way that doesn't make it sound like a fucking ShamWow commercial. It won't cure any ailments, but it can prevent poison and rot buildup from accumulating after you've taken a bath in an AIDS lake. Plus, if you're ever in short supply for some reason and can't find any melted mushrooms, fire up the old Blood Nagakiba build, start invading fuckers near the main academy gate, and nice considerate players in the community will make sure your soap stock never runs out. Number 41 and 40, the Magic and Fire Pots. They're fucking pots. You throw them at people and they explode. Okay, actually, no, I think this section deserves a bit more than just a lazy sentence saying I can't be fucked or something. The flat damage discrepancies here was honestly not something I was expecting, but it does make a lot of sense and puts into perspective how aware the game is of its own elemental balancing. The Magic Pot has the highest overall base damage with 322, I'm guessing because magic absorption is fairly common among stronger enemies and bosses. The Fire Pot, on the other hand, is only given 230 base damage, and even despite the Fire Pot being almost 100 points of damage weaker, you still get a little more mileage out of it just because enemies with a high fire absorption are considerably less common. Number 39, Rot Grease. I have very little love for this item if I'm being completely truthful, but the scarcity of quality rot building items and weapons means this is probably the best you're gonna get, at least for a few more months. I've spat in the face of 63 buildup many times throughout history, but with rot being as inaccessible as it is, I'd rather use this than pretty much any other poison item. The one exception again probably being Poison Spray Mist, and it's gonna be a while before we get to that one, so just hang tight. There is a stronger variant of rot available as well, but that's on an incantation, so it's nothing we need to worry about here in this video. Number 38, the Warming Stone. I cannot underline what a massive throbbing simpleton you are if you ever pass on 25 heals per second for any reason. But there's an equally massive caveat to this item. The params show you this item's effective range as a radius of 3. In layman's terms, this essentially means that if you aren't literally gripping this stone between your ass cheeks, then it won't matter how much healing it does. It won't matter if it orders your groceries for you. This leads to you trying to get as much of the healing as you can by playing around the same spot, which can leave you in a potentially uncomfortable position versus bosses with large AoEs, because let's face it, you ain't using any of these to help you out with standard dudes. Number 37, 36, and 35, the Magic, Fire, and Lightning Greases. Elemental greases do not scale with Arcane, so quit putting it on the Ripple Axe and thinking it does something significant. I'm just ranking all of these together because having to listen to the same paragraph 3 times in a row probably isn't an ideal way to spend your time, even if most of you just listen to these as background noise. It's 85 damage of a specific elemental type, meaning the order of these items is ultimately going to fall on how productive said element is in combat, and in that regard, lightning appears pretty frequently on the list of enemy weaknesses. Number 34, Drawstring Soporific Grease. This consumable is just full of little surprises, but mostly because sleep in and of itself is just a wonderful status to have in your pocket. Even if your arcane stat isn't that high, landing 2 or 3 hits on any standard enemy is usually enough, and even sleep-resistant enemies still go into that weird animation where they take a nap for 2 seconds like they just lost a slap fight. I also found out in the middle of recording footage for this item that sleeping the Karian Troll Knights when they summon Glint Blades prevents them from firing. And I'm sure that's useful knowledge to somebody, so there you go. Number 33, the Holy Proof Liver. This is not an item you will ever need for a massive percentage of the game. You're led to believe holy damage is sort of an afterthought element that's particularly relegated to things like prayers and healing boons. The few actual sources of early game holy damage, like tree avatars and grafted scions, always seem to have hard counters to something that's easily accessible in the game. But then it starts handing out Crucible Knights and Black Blade Kindreds and fucking this guy's bitch ass, and suddenly those holy livers becomes something you just took for granted. It's not a completely necessary item for the endgame, but sometimes it's enough extra absorption to mitigate the steep difficulty curve. Don't waste them. Number 32, the Rot Pot. 300 goddamn build-up in a single pot. Aeonian butterflies are limited, of course, and that makes dependency on this item feel very uncomfortable, but I think complaining that 300 upfront build-up doesn't scale with Arcane just makes me sound like an ungrateful bitch. 300 of anything is usually enough to proc once or twice, and these pots are doubly useful alongside crossbows with black key bolts if that amount of build-up just so happens to be barely not enough. Number 31, the large Glintstone Scrap. Uncraftable and a bit of a bitch to find, but their offense potential is invaluable in crowds. Glintstone Scraps are some of the most fun consumables I think you can use because the target they fire at is decided completely by your lock-on. This makes overwhelming crowds with small arms very doable because you can break this while locked onto one enemy and switch your attention to another, usually bigger enemy, while the small dude is having fun throwing his controller. They deal around 500 to 600 damage if all the bullets hit, which isn't awful. Honestly, pretty great damage for a consumable item. Just wish farming them didn't feel like such a waste of time. Number 30, the Roped Fly Pot. Roped pots are generally not my favorite items, only because running away from anything too powerful for me is a massive blow to my YouTuber ego, but the fly pots are a bit of a different case due to its lingering hitbox and surprisingly large damage area. Continuous bleed buildup in a concentrated space can end up proccing on 4 or 5 different smaller enemies at a time. There are 4 total emitters, each of which inflict 70 buildup if the whole thing hits, which is a pretty nice sum of status. Number 29, the Gravity Stone Chunk. The damage on this consumable is way too good, and the farming process for it is way too annoying. Starcallers have a 4% chance to drop them, but there are only 3 main locations where groups of them can actually be located, being Ainsel River, above the Weeping Peninsula, and the right-hand side of the wall in Altus near the Falling Star Beast. The actual damage has a slight delay, which means landing this on a dodging enemy is akin to pissing through the center hole of a DVD, but they're really good sources of damage against slow, lumbering enemies that are too lazy or just can't be asked to move out of the way. And since it's gravity damage, it can also knock flyers out of the air. Number 28, Soporific Grease. Greases in general aren't really my favorite consumables. They require unaltered, unaffinitied weapons to work on, and the only reason I think Soporific Grease is as coveted as it is because there isn't really a sleep affinity. Maybe we'll get like a Bewitching or a Soporific affinity in the DLC or something, but for now, that's not the case. 33 buildup also just isn't good. Like, it's just not that extraordinary, even considering the average sleep resistance found on enemies is generally lower than the others. Putting sleep on a Grease also has this weird side effect where if something gets slept and you're in the middle of a combo, you can very easily just switch the effect back off and wake them up again by complete accident. Sleep is an underappreciated status, even today, but I still think we could do a little better. Number 27, the Lightning Pot. The Lightning Pot is interesting, mainly because it's the one exception to the rule Elden Ring built around how they handle the base damage of pots. The more enemies that are resistant to a certain element, the higher its base damage is likely going to be to compensate for it. We see this not only on regular magic and fire pots, but their ritual pot variants as well. The Lightning Pot, the independent girl boss that it is, loudly shoves its 260 base damage in everyone's face, despite having the longest list of enemy weaknesses and an opportunity to be boosted if it hits an enemy in water. Lightning has already given so many chances to shine and perform in this game, so seeing a number like 260 on the Lightning Pot was genuinely surprising. Number 26, roped Volcano Pots. Volcano Pots occupy a large area for a good few seconds, making the roped variants surprisingly not ass. And I only say that because it's already difficult enough to warrant wasting one of the rarest materials on an item I could craft plenty of without. But the roped Volcano Pot actually works really well. The lingering volcanic cloud deals 10 ticks of fire damage in total and stays active for 3 seconds. And in the middle of gripping combat, 3 seconds is just a long goddamn time. You even have enough time to pull enemies into the cloud with a weapon skill like Gravitas, and if all the ticks connect, this single pot can end up dealing several hundreds of damage to multiple targets. Number 25, the Gravity Stone Fan. This bitch devours Nox monks like movie theater popcorn. Enemies will recognize the gravity fan as a projectile and dodge as you spike it into the ground, followed by them point blank eating the slow crawling shockwave that comes after. The only enemy that can clear enough distance to successfully avoid the shockwave altogether, I think, would be Black Knives. Otherwise, it's a guaranteed hit and a guaranteed flinch against Nox monks, Kaidans, Banished Knights, Cleanrot Knights, and other enemies with shitty poise. Number 24, Preserving Boluses. The player's base health pool tops out at 2100 HP with 99 Vigor, and that is a frighteningly small total compared to most enemies. The reason this is important is because Scarlet Rot always seems to do its work much quicker when you're the sad sack inflicted with it. Scarlet Rot deals 1/3% of your max HP plus 13 flat damage every second, and when you're in the late game, that's usually going to equal out to around 20 DPS, which is mercilessly fast. Like, this shit will kill you if you just try and run out the clock. Once you hit Caelid and beyond, rot becomes noticeably more common, so having a few of these on your person is always recommended. Number 23, Shield Grease. This is an amazing grease to have no matter what size shield you have. It stacks multiplicatively with the Great Shield Talisman, throttling your guard boost by almost 50% when both effects are active, while giving all damage negations on your shield a slight boost. The formula is a little weird, but it's essentially 20% of the damage it doesn't block. Take the 16% lightning absorption on the Perfumer shield. That's 84% of the damage that isn't getting absorbed, and dividing that by 5 and rounding up and gives you 17%, which is the final negation boost for that element. This also means small shields will receive the largest benefit, since those negation numbers are usually the smallest. Number 22, the Kukri. Wonderful damage per throw, and it can be thrown preemptively at bigger enemies to get a head start on bleed buildup. The throwing daggers in most dart consumables feel vastly more comfortable to use due to their animations being much quicker and having faster recovery times. Throwing a Kukri requires commitment to the bit. It takes way more time to wind up, it locks you in place for a couple seconds, and the damage fall off starts to get pretty inconvenient across long ranges. Bosses with incredibly long introduction routines like Mog and Godric are susceptible consumable to spam, and you might even proc a couple times if you stand back far enough. Number 21 and 20, Throwing Daggers and Poison Bone Darts. Choosing between these two for me is a pretty strenuous debate, but at the end of the day, the materials required for making Poison Bone Darts are all completely renewable and common resources. Literally any Miranda Sprout you kill drops 5 poison blooms at once. Throwing Daggers deal 17 more physical damage per throw, but getting them is slightly more inconvenient, as running out demands a subsequent trip to Kale to replenish your stock, and buying these fuckers in bulk is no small expense. The poison buildup is a nice bonus, and if it saves me 24,000 runes per top off, a couple minutes of aggressive gardening isn't really a huge price to pay. Number 19, the Frenzyflame Stone. 35 HP per second, you son of a bitch. Throw down a few of these in your immediate vicinity and never be challenged by an NPC invader ever again. That's all I have to say about it. It's just a good item. Number 18, Poison Spray Mist. Remember when I said that there were 3 different poison types in the game? Well, I may have left one out. The 2 Fetid Pot variants have slightly different build-up damage for some reason, but none of that shit even matters because I am now introducing you to the best poison consumable in the game. This is the deadliest poison you can find, weighing in at a sinus blasting 0.21% max HP plus 21 flat damage per second, which is literally faster than Scarlet Rot. Sprinkle a little poison moth flight on that bitch and you got you got the only poison build that can last until the endgame is what you got. Number 17 and 16, the Redmane Fire Pot and Giant's Flame Pot. Okay, so there are some glaring weaknesses that come with both heavy fire pots that I think most of us would just rather prefer if they weren't there. But unfortunately, that's not how balancing works. And I think the game does a decent job at giving them both massive enough drawbacks that neither pot is really a clear and obvious choice. The Redmane Pot scales from multiple stats, making it more flexible, but it requires an item called the Old Fang, which, as we've already touched on, is extremely hard to get reliably once you've cleared out the non-respawning Lion Guardians. Giant's Flame Pots scale from 1 stat, but have higher base damage and can be crafted from respawnable resources, but they also cost 10 FP per throw, defeating the point of using these as a backup. Even still, I personally think the heaviest hit here is the requiring of the Old Fang as a resource, because that's basically putting a limiter on the amount of pots you can carry per playthrough. Even with the FP cost, 10 FP isn't a huge deal for most late game builds, so I still think the edge is gonna have to go to the Giant's Flame. Number 15, the Ancient Dragonbolt Pot. Scaling reasonably well off of both core physical stats means this will not only end up doing the highest upfront damage of any of the heavier pots, but it's also the most accessible. Most builds are going to be able to use it to decent effect right out of the box. Still not completely in favor of the decision someone made to hide the necessary crafting materials behind a respawning dragon with a skeleton army between it and the nearest grace, but this ain't no anti-dragon serum that you'll use once every 2 hours. This is probably the single most versatile elemental pot in the game, so if the item is worth, then it's worth. Number 14, Fan Daggers. I don't know how I've lived up to this point without giving the Fan Daggers an honest college try, because these daggers can hack right through some of the most frustrating enemies in the game. They scale amazingly with both physical stats, and an in-game build that relies on dex can use the age-old blunderbuss technique by shoving yourself up the ass of the nearest enemy, and you'll potentially be handing out 300 damage per throw on standard dudes, making it one of the few consumables with damage that can actually keep up with just R1ing something with your main hand weapon. They can reliably deal damage to rune bears, omen, and finger creepers get completely lynched by these due to their wider size, making them a perfect fit for the trajectory of the fan. One for each finger, you son of a bitch. Number 13, the Pickled Turtleneck. More stamina regen is great for every player function you could possibly think of. I've already went over why it's good in countless videos, but here's just a reminder. Recover faster from firing spells, dodging, attacking, blocking, throwing pots, pretty much anything except eating a second pickled turtleneck. It's good, and if you're sleeping on it, I don't know what I can do to help you. Number 12, the Bewitching Branch. This branch can charm plenty of different enemies. I just don't think people like testing items. Cleanrot Knights, Banished Knights, Bloodhound Knights, Pages, Ancestral Goobers, Battle Mages, Oracle Envoys of any size, Pumpkin Heads! If this honestly worked on as many enemies as people wanted it to, no one would ever use or even like this item due to imbalance. You get way more than just a brainwashed enemy with this item. The true strength of the Bewitching Branch lies in its ability to fuck up the target priority of an entire mob. You can thin out whole crowds of strong in-game enemies with just a single charmed enemy taking the heat off of you. It legitimately feels like playing with a spirit summon cheat. So what if rune bears can't be charmed? Who cares? Go brainwash a pumpkin head and kick the shit out of it. Number 11, the Blood Boil Aromatic. There are so many benefits given to you by this item that not even the description can cover them all in a concise and cohesive way. Raising physical attack by 30% is already better than what you'll find on even most incantations, but it also increases maximum stamina and stamina regen by an extra 5 per second. It's one of the iconic fuck it items in the game that you just throw on when you aren't exactly sure what you need, but you just know you're really good at not getting hit and don't care about much else. This is also a body buff, which plays to its advantage greatly because most aura buffs such as Rallying Standard and Golden Vow allow you an easy way to mitigate some of that 25% reduction without overriding the physical damage buff. Number 10, the Swarm Pot. All the same benefits of the Roped Fly Pot, but more upfront, more accurate, and it combines beautifully with Blood Flame incantations like Swarm of Flies because they're both able to stun lock smaller enemies to the point of a bleed proc, all without the unnecessary expedition of looking for string. Number 9, the Rancor Pot. Fires 4 Rancor bullets with a high technology targeting system built within each one that ensures they never miss a single enemy, except when they accidentally hit a wall or something, I guess that happens sometimes. 139 magic damage for every projectile, and that's not even the strongest advantage to using this pot. The Rancor bullets can also flinch even medium-sized enemies, opening up the opportunity for you to greet them with a nice wallop via an armament of your choice. This pot would have been top 3 for me if it weren't for the ridiculousness I had to go through to get the items for it. Number 8, the Sleep Pot. Now, if you're looking solely at the buildup, the Sleep Pot can be a little misleading. 29 buildup of anything is hilariously insignificant, but looking at the bullet param shows us that the sleep-inflicting cloud lingers for 3 full seconds, the ticks of buildup happening every 1/5 of a second, totaling out to 435 fucking buildup per single pot. My goodness, good golly gosh darn god, that is an alarming quantity of sleep buildup. Plus the fact that it just accumulates so fast, like that's a tick every 1/5 of a second. Even if a faster enemy gets hit with this and they don't hang around for the AoE for as long, that's still likely going to be build up around the 1 to 200s. It's probably the single greatest status pot right next to the Freezing Pot in my opinion. Number 7, the Freezing Pot. Frostbite buildup does not scale with your arcane stat, meaning the flat buildup on the pot will never change. And you should be thankful it never changes, because it compensates for lack of scaling by offering 380 immediate frost buildup. An absolute cold cocktail of status that one-hit procs on anything that isn't a boss, including some bosses. On bleed and sleep pots, those are numbers you have to put in some overtime for. You gotta do arcane tricep dips and shit. But no, frostbite builds get all the privileges. Number 6 and 5, the Boiled Prawn and Crab. Neither are craftable, but they are purchasable in an unlimited supply. It's straight up physical damage negation, which isn't just useful by itself, it can also be used to counteract the harmful effects of other items like the Blood Boil Aromatic, talismans like the Scorpion Charms and Sore Seals, and can make up for the lack of damage absorption on lighter builds that use lighter armors. I think not allowing it to be craftable almost increases this item's overall value to me, because having to take time to gather resources to craft a 60-second buff would just make me feel like I'm wasting my time. They're a little on the expensive side, but you can hold up to 99 each, making them just as plentiful as they need to be. Number 4, the Oil Pot. So I think the Oil Pot, Molotov combo in Bloodborne locked us in an unproductive routine that doesn't really do us any favors in this game. To the average pot thrower, which almost sounds like a derogatory phrase for a group of people, oil pots boost their next fire pot by 50%. But that's not using them to their full power. 50% more fire damage taken is 50% more fire damage taken. You can amplify the damage of Flame Spit, the Blasphemous Blade skill, the Stance Star 2 on the Sword of Night and Flame, any fire or Frenzyflame incantation, just 50% more damage up front, immediately. And when fire is as diverse as it already is, this pot starts to become very alluring. Number 3, the Volcano Pot. This should honestly just not be a cracked pot item. It deals way too much damage. It can outpace the damage of heavy magic and fire pots against larger enemies that are able to take the whole effect of the volcanic cloud. And like, I'm talking 4-digit amounts of damage if it's weak enough. It also covers a wide radius, leaving room for multiple enemies to come in and join the party of getting burned alive. Fucking wahoo. Okay, these last two items may have been the toughest decision of my entire YouTube career, but after weighing the possibilities and keeping track of everything that's been mentioned on this list so far, I think these are the two true no-brainers. Number 2, the Crystal Dart. Crystal Darts have a secret advantage that isn't told to you anywhere in the description and is barely even shown anywhere in gameplay, but Crystal Darts deal both physical and magic damage. 66 and 44, totaling out to 110 total base damage. For reference, the throwing daggers deal 67. This little bit of magic damage on each dart opens up an ocean-wide power gap between this and all other dart-adjacent consumables. They can short-circuit watchdogs and other smaller imps into fighting each other, and all I need to craft them is a few cracked crystals that can be found in bulk in any mining cave and farmed from glintstone miners. The 66 physical damage means even if something is strong against magic, its damage floor is still comparable to the ceiling of the throwing dagger. There's just no reason not to craft a few of these. It is swift glintstone shard damage with 1 fucking FP cost. Number 1, the Spark Aromatic. Most of the perfumer-based items come in the form of random buffs and debuffs that, while aesthetically incredible and fun to look at, can be a little confusing on how to implement, especially when you get into what effects can potentially override each other. The Spark Aromatic is just none of that shit. It is the picture-perfect combination of easy to use, easy to craft, and wonderful damage up front. Damage that just shouldn't be on a consumable. 352 base fire damage puts it in direct competition with Giant's Flame Pots, only with half the FP cost, twice the ease of crafting, and it scales with Dex, making Dex builds even more stupidly flexible than they already are. The damage spread is enormous, you can throw it at the ground for a faster activation, and the bullet even hangs around for an additional second or two before bursting, just to ensure the maximum number of enemies have an opportunity to carelessly sprint into it. I understand why this is the only offensive perfume bottle consumable. It's the only one any of you should ever need, and asking for so much as a decimal point more of damage would be ungrateful and selfish. If you're sleeping on this, there is no, oh my god, look, you're missing out. No, you should just be ashamed of yourself.